Gang. City of dreams, living your great. You're living your great. City of dreams, city of gang. Gang.
Cyberpunk 2077 has had a tragic path to release and recovery. In an ironic series of events, Cyberpunk, a game which focuses on corporate villainy and greed, was plagued by corporate villainy and greed. Even from the beginning, the game started off on the wrong foot. Announced in 2012 and then teased in 2013, the game set high expectations, and over the years garnered plenty of hype. At this time, CD Projekt Red's other major title, The Witcher 3, was still in active development and wouldn't be released for another 3 years. This was mistake number 1. Announcing a project well before it even entered development. Years went by without any real news until E3 2018, after numerous cinematic CG trailers. The game was finally fully revealed with gameplay. After the massive success of The Witcher 3, the excitement for the game reached an impressive height. Fans expected nothing less than a genre-defining RPG that would change games forever. As new trailers came out and gamers were given more glimpses at the game, expectations continued to rise. The game was promising astounding graphics, a massive open world with dense verticality that had never been seen before, hundreds of lifelike NPCs wandering the streets at any given moment, and more. These were lofty goals, especially for a game that had only been in development for a few years. After many delays, the game finally released in December of 2020 to incredible demand, bringing the Steam servers to their knees, as record numbers of players tried to download the game. And then, disaster. The game was broken. Console versions were pretty much unplayable, the PC version worked, but was riddled with bugs and crashes, and CDPR had been hiding how poor of a shape the game was actually in. Cyberpunk 2077 has had one of the most catastrophic launches the industry has ever seen, and will likely forever hold a place in gaming history. If anything, I'd hope the industry would take note and strive to avoid these issues, and allow developers the time they need to finish their games and release them in a finished state. Judging by the number of awful, broken launches in the last 2 years, my hopes are not high. Even CDPR hasn't learned their lesson. Despite all this, I was obsessed with Cyberpunk, and it was easily one of my favorite games of the past few years. I was entranced by Night City, the crude, intrusive advertising, the filth of the streets, and the full-on commitment to the sex, drugs, and rock and roll culture. In terms of tone, the game pulls no punches. This got me past the bugs and made me fall in love with the game. Now, nearly 2 years later, what do I think of the game? Am I still obsessed with Night City? Are the flaws more glaring now that the novelty is worn off? And is the game fixed at all? The short answer is yes. I love Cyberpunk 2077, and the game has received quite a few massive patches, most of which were delayed from the original content roadmap, but it's in considerably better shape now. Bugs have been largely mitigated, and the game plays as intended now. But of course, the long answer is coming up. Some clarifications though first. The version of the game that I did my latest playthrough on was 1.35. So that is where the majority of the footage that you're going to be seeing is going to come from. Even then, I thought the game was in a remarkably improved state since launch, and a year later the game is doing even better. Overall, I would say that most of what I'm about to say holds true across both versions, but if I feature any notable glitches in the video, I will denote which version of the game is being run. With the improvements that are still yet to come, and a big new expansion set for next year, should you hold off for another patch, or is now the time to try and make it in the City of Dreams? Let's find out. First things first. I've been playing quite a bit lately and have run into significantly less issues even than when I played last year. On PC at launch, the game was definitely playable, but a host of visual glitches made the experience far less than ideal, and it crashed frequently. There were a lot of game-breaking bugs, but it worked. Luckily, I've not run into any significant glitches since starting the game up, even last year. I've also not run into any crashes. I can't speak for the console versions, but the PC version is in a much better state than it was 2 years ago. Though still not entirely perfect, there are a couple of minor visual glitches here and there. A lot of the issues remaining though are simply ones inherent to the game's design. Enemy AI is a major complaint most people have, and they've updated it at least once and have promised to rework the AI system again in an upcoming major patch. Now, let's dive into the game itself. Cyberpunk 2077 is not the revolutionary step many had hoped for, but if you can reset your expectations and consider the game for what it is, there is a lot to love. Starting with the story, the developer's experience is apparent. The basic structure remains unchanged from The Witcher 3, with robust and well-written dialogue occupying a significant amount of your playtime. Both actors for the player voice do a superb job of bringing V to life, and the same can be said about the rest of the cast. All of the principals are absolutely expertly done, and it's clear that the voice direction was very strong.
What about me?
The main story is much shorter than The Witcher 3, though it still clocks in at a solid 20-ish hours. In my opinion, this is preferable to The Witcher's 50-plus hour main questline, especially given the multiple endings, but that boils down to personal taste. That's not to say the game is light on content, however, as side quests are just as numerous as in The Witcher. Perhaps my biggest appreciation for CDPR has been their talent for making side quests that are just as developed as main missions and hardly ever feel like filler or wasted time, and this is no less true in Cyberpunk. The main plot is pretty interesting and engaging, and Keanu Reeves' Johnny Silverhand is a super compelling character that doesn't at all feel like a celebrity gimmick. On the whole, the writing is fantastic and rarely feels stilted. There's a lot of lingo and slang made up for this world, and it all plays very naturally and doesn't feel corny or out of place. It's clear that there was a lot of effort put into blending it all in seamlessly. The other main chunk of the game is, of course, combat scenarios, and here the game presents you with a lot of ways to play. If you prefer a stealthier approach, you can take control of situations by hacking enemies, creating environmental distractions, opening doors, overriding security systems, hijacking turrets, and plenty more. You can also, of course, just brute force everything, with a suite of guns and melee weapons at your disposal. As you play, you get ability points that you can use to level up your primary stats and then unlock buffs and new abilities, calling back to the game's roots as a tabletop RPG. Obstacles in the world can often be overcome by a high enough stat in said skills, but sometimes you'll encounter a door that can only be brute forced, and if your stat isn't high enough, you'll just have to find another way around. When not out on quest, the whole of Night City is yours to explore. You can visit shops, buy gear, clothes, sex, guns, or new cyberware at a Reupload. Some of these upgrades from the Reupload are just buffs or HP boosts, while others are entirely new tools that you can use in combat, like the Mantis Blades. Cyberware can get pretty pricey, so it's a good incentive to take on gigs or side jobs. There's also plenty of gear to collect, ways to customize your character, and even a ton of cars to purchase and drive around. In a recent update, they even added apartments that you can buy in different parts of Night City. There's also now the ability to save outfits and recustomize your character at your apartment or at a Reupload. In the city, there are also plenty of things to do, skirmishes to settle, people to fight, quests to pick up, and of course, the shops to visit. So that's the gameplay structure. But what does it actually feel like to play? Gunplay is crunchy and satisfying, but it's nothing special. It is very much an RPG and not a first-person shooter. Melee combat is serviceable, but it's not that interesting and isn't really super viable without a high-level weapon, though any of the armed cyberware weapons are very lethal. There are plenty of guns to collect and play around with, and some of them are really interesting and unique, but you'll quickly find yourself using the same ones for almost everything. Revolvers are cracked, and I had one equipped for nearly all of my playtime across both of the playthroughs I've done. There are also mods that you can attach to your weapons and clothes, as is pretty standard. Enemies tend to be pretty spongy, and the AI isn't that great, so combat is rarely little more than something just to keep you busy. Don't get me wrong though, it is enjoyable. Nothing about it is bad, it's just pretty routine. And if you're looking at the game because you want a new shooter, this probably won't be what you're looking for. The fun comes from choosing how to approach situations, and different options will be available to you based on the stats, as I was saying earlier. You might be able to sneak past a room entirely through hacking a door, but if you don't have enough technical ability, you'll have to fight your way through. None of this is revolutionary of course, but I enjoy it and I think the game does it well enough. Similar complaints about the combat were levied against The Witcher 3, and I think if you didn't mind the combat in that game, you'll be just fine here too. The real attraction of Cyberpunk 2077 is the storytelling, world building, and of course, the city. Night City is a dizzying, neon-soaked metropolis where the puddles on the street are just as likely to be blood as rainwater. Especially on high-tier hardware, the city is gorgeous. Though even on low settings or lesser hardware, the image is pretty impressive. I've been playing a lot recently on Steam Deck, and it's surprisingly playable. At low settings, you can get a nearly perfect 30 FPS almost all of the time, and on the smaller screen, the game looks gorgeous. Menu text is unfortunately often illegibly small, but it's still a great way to play. But enough about that, I'll talk about graphics later. Every frame of this game is dense with detail, and the verticality of the environment is incredible. There is a lot of vertical space to explore, but there is obviously a lot more space that can't be explored, with very few floors being accessible by elevator, with a lot of buildings being inaccessible entirely, and there are many, many locked doors that seem to me to be permanently locked. There are lots of things to do scattered across the map, and on the whole, the setup is again very similar to The Witcher 3. It's fun to run around the city, but I don't really spend much time aimlessly wandering. I'd rather just stop by things that look interesting when I'm on my way to do something else. Aside from walking, the other main mode of transportation is, of course, driving. And at launch, all of the vehicles controlled miserably, but they've since updated it, and the vehicles are pretty serviceable at this point. It's fun, but it's no Forza. While the city is gorgeous to look at, it doesn't really beg you to explore it. There's stuff to do and find, but a lot of the areas look the same. The handful of distinct neighborhoods definitely do look distinct, but within those sections of the map, it can be kind of hard to navigate without following the map. It's not easy to intuit your relative location in the density of these city streets, but it's hard to imagine how else this could be. Real-life cities are the same, and human navigation largely relies on relative position to fixed landmarks, which are not typically visible when massive skyscrapers surround you all of the time. The game simply isn't designed to be explorable without a map, and this doesn't detract from the game. I just kind of wish there was a little more innate incentive to actually explore. I already mentioned it a little bit when I was talking about the visuals earlier, but I want to talk more about the presentation, because I think the game absolutely astounds in this regard. The experience of walking around the wet streets as reflections of dozens of neon signs dance across your screen is mystifying every single time. From a technical and artistic perspective, the game is stunning. Even after 70 or so hours, I always find myself stopping to ogle at the game at least once every time I boot it up. Cyberpunk is also an excellent showcase of ray tracing technology. There are a handful of RT settings with varying levels, and even more coming in an update soon, though you will definitely need a next-gen card for it. These settings are very demanding, but DLSS does a great job in this game. I played the game originally at 1440p, ultra performance DLSS, and high-ish ray tracing settings on a 2060 my first time around. Of course, this card is not top of the line, but it still looked pretty great, but ultra performance at 1440p means a native 720, so the image got pretty blurry at that setting. It looks great, still, not at all like 720, but I'd recommend toning down the RT and using a higher quality DLSS setting. On my second playthrough, I opted for no RT and higher native res, and the game still looks gorgeous. For early hardware adopters, Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the absolute best use cases for the new graphics cards. But even with the 4090, it still is a demanding title and is obviously built with future hardware in mind. Moving on to audio, the soundtrack is incredible, with a great score from the composer of the Witcher games, some great commissioned pieces that exist diegetically in the world as music that will play on car radios, and some great licensed inclusions as well. The in-world band Samurai is really cool too, because there's this whole collection of music commissioned to an actual band and greatly contributes to the world building, really establishing a sense that Night City is a real place with real culture and music, and everybody in this city shares that knowledge. Having pop culture that the player actively participates in with other characters in the world, rather than just having radio stations that nobody else acknowledges, is super cool. Up till now, I've probably given a somewhat mixed impression of the game, but as I mentioned at the beginning, I adore this game. For the last 3 years, this game has always been in the back of my mind, and for the last 3 years, I have been deeply obsessed with it every winter. Why? Because the world this game has built is captivating like no other game I've ever experienced. Night City is entrancing, and CDPR has captured it perfectly. The game does such a good job of reminding you that despite the plot of the game revolving around you, and despite getting caught up in some pretty big shit, you are nothing. Night City keeps churning all the same. The neon graveyard is unaffected by your actions as the player. It is an unmovable, unstoppable force. There are countless stories unfolding in Night City at any given moment, and while you experience the tiniest fraction of them, there is this illusion built of a real city, especially after Edgerunners, which is another full-bodied story that takes place slightly before the events of 77, and it has no impact on the larger city or the events of the game, yet still feels entirely connected. There is a genius in what they've done here, creating a world that could hold any number of stories without having to reiterate or rehash the same ideas and characters. And hey, maybe I'm alone on this. Maybe I'm doing all the legwork in my imagination. But to me, Night City feels like a place where anything could happen, even though the game's systems are fairly rigid in that way, but it truly feels like a city of endless possibilities. It feels like a real place that could exist. The atmosphere is so rich and exciting. The city is so densely detailed with garbage and junk and blood and shit and corpses. The game is constantly throwing advertisements at you. Advertisements that are so obnoxious and annoying. Advertisements that are damningly lusty, and some that are just blatantly revolting. And they all just blend into the background noise, which there is a lot of, by the way. The audio design in this game is superb and directly feeds the immersion. Silence is rare in Night City. The player is constantly exposed to the general hum of city voices, the roar of car engines, the intermittent sounds of gunshots and shouting as fights break out across the city. It might sound obnoxious, but it's blended really well, and eventually all just fades into background noise after a while, and is super immersive. My only complaint is that the variety of the adverts is a little bit slim, and you listen to the same handful blaring over the streets of Night City over and over and over.
All pleasure from all foods provides 330% of...
That said though, the variety of music available on the various radio stations is pretty incredible. There is an impressive number of radio stations with an impressive number of tracks that play on them. And a lot of the music is really good. A lot of the soundtrack has just entered my everyday playlists and has remained there in the years since launch. Fortunately, the radio glitches present at launch seem to be patched out entirely now, and you can actually listen to the radio when you get in your car. I do wish there was an option to play music while walking around the city through your in-game phone or something, but it is honestly rare that I spend a significant time walking anyway, so it's not a big deal. This game just accesses a part of my brain that nothing else ever has. The dystopian messaging is so on the nose and over the top, but it still works because the creative team has fully committed to it. Night City is obviously a bad place to live. It is such a shit place to live. Everything reeks and rots, and it is so blatantly presented in this manner, and the allure still makes sense. It's still there. The promise of this life, despite everything, the I'm built different, I'd make it out, I'd make something there mentality. It all makes sense to the player, how people wind up in this dump. The actual plot is great and engaging, but the life of this killer city is what makes the game a gem. The one major blemish in the immersion effort is the NPCs. They don't animate super well, and they look kind of out of place sometimes, and their AI isn't great either, and you'll see the same one 3 times on the same sidewalk. So unfortunately, the actual people of Night City kind of break the immersion, but it's easy enough to look past after a little while because the rest of the city is so impressive. The game just grabs my brain and shakes it around like a dog with a chew toy. I could go on for ages about this game, and I do. Frequently. I am very annoying about this game in real life. This game, to me, despite everything, even at launch with the jarring glitches and immersion-breaking bugs, and especially now when everything is more polished, is a superb example of video game world building. The team has created a world that I desperately want to spend time in. I've had to rip myself away from the game just to finish this review, and it has been brutal. In all honesty, I don't even think I've done a good job explaining why I adore this game. And I'm not sure I could do it in this essay-style format. It's simply a sublime experience that I find really hard to put into words. But I highly recommend it to anyone who likes the cyberpunk genre, is even remotely intrigued by the setting, or is just looking for a game to get lost in. If you aren't interested in world building or immersion, I'd still recommend the game. It can be pretty fun, especially since the game goes for so cheap these days. To me though, it really is a thing of beauty, and will never fade away in my memory as one of my all-time favorite games. thank you all so much for watching. I'm excited to finally get this video out. I was originally working on this script a year ago for the game's first anniversary, and ended up just not being able to make it happen. Cyberpunk 2077 is a game I obviously love very dearly, and I'm glad to talk about it here, even if I find it kind of difficult to actually convey the way I feel about this game in this kind of format. If you enjoyed the video, I would super appreciate if you let me know by liking and or commenting. And if you didn't, tell me why. I'm always looking to improve. Also, huge welcome to the news channel subs. We just hit 200, which is crazy to me. It's a dream come true for me to have people that actually want to hear me ramble on and on about this stuff. So, thank you all again. Cheers.